They had it all. A life that everyone envied, a love that seemed untouchable, or so it appeared. To their neighbors, to their friends, even to their children, Ezra and Clarissa Deveraux were the embodiment of perfection. A marriage that had lasted for decades. A family that seemed unbreakable. A storybook life, so flawless it could never be touched by darkness. But what if everything you thought you knew was a lie? What if the person you trusted most, the one you loved with all your heart, was hiding something that could shatter everything? What if the perfect life you thought you had was built on a foundation of blood and betrayal? When the truth finally came crashing down, it wasn't just Ezra's secrets that were exposed. It was a revelation so monstrous, so chilling, it would unravel a life and a family forever. How do you recover when the nightmare begins with someone you never suspected? How do you even begin to mourn when the person you loved turns out to be the very monster you never saw coming? Before we dive deeper into this unimaginable story, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more chilling true crime cases about love, lies, and betrayal. Clarissa Deveraux was the epitome of grace. In Jackson, Mississippi, she was a beloved figure, a woman everyone seemed to admire and trust. As a former teacher, she shaped the minds of the community's youth with a patience and wisdom that endeared her to all. Her reputation was built on pillars of faith, marriage, and motherhood, values that defined the very core of who she was. For Clarissa, life was simple yet fulfilling, centered around her home, her church, and the family she loved so deeply. Her life, from the outside looking in, seemed like the perfect picture of happiness, stability, and unwavering devotion. It was in those early years at Southern University that Clarissa first crossed paths with Ezra Deveraux. He was a quiet, unassuming figure, a man of few words but striking presence. There was a certain mystery to him, one that piqued Clarissa's curiosity from the moment they met. Ezra spoke often of the pain in his past, of losing his family at a young age, and it was this tragic backstory that seemed to draw Clarissa in. She, too, had experienced her own fair share of hardship, and the connection between them was instant. They found comfort in each other's arms, two wounded souls who had somehow found solace in the other. Their whirlwind romance was the kind of love people only dreamed of. In just a matter of months, they were inseparable, as if the universe itself had crafted their path together. It wasn't long before Ezra proposed, and Clarissa, overwhelmed with love and hope, said yes. Their marriage, a beautiful affair, was celebrated by everyone who knew them, and from that moment, the Deveraux were seen as the perfect couple. They were the standard, the gold standard, of what love and devotion looked like. Ezra was the ideal husband, loyal, kind, and always by Clarissa's side. No one questioned them. No one had reason to. Together, they built a life that seemed untouched by the world's darkness. 3 children, Malik, Darnell, and Ayanna, followed, each one a testament to the strength of their bond. Their home was filled with laughter, warmth, and the sense of a family that could weather any storm. Their children were growing up strong, nurtured by the love of 2 parents who truly seemed to have it all. The Deveraux family became a fixture in Jackson society. Their friends admired them, their neighbors envied them, and their children's successes only added to the myth of the perfect family. They attended church together every Sunday, their faces always the picture of serenity. Ezra and Clarissa, always hand in hand, appeared to be the ideal couple, the kind of people you looked to when you needed an example of how to live a good life. But, like all stories that appear too perfect, there was something beneath the surface, a subtle, yet undeniable, tension waiting to unravel. In the months and years to come, it would become clearer that things were not as they seemed, that the perfect life they had built together was based on a lie so twisted it would shatter everything. The foundations of their marriage, once so solid, would begin to crack, revealing a truth darker than Clarissa could ever imagine. For now, though, the world saw nothing but the illusion. The Deveraux were untouchable, a symbol of everything people aspired to be. And Clarissa, the heart of it all, could never have guessed that the man she loved so deeply, the one who seemed to understand her better than anyone, was hiding secrets that would soon change everything. As the years passed, The cracks in the Deveraux family's seemingly perfect life began to appear small, almost imperceptible at first, but unsettling in their quiet persistence. It was nothing overt, nothing anyone could point to and say, "That's the moment it all started to unravel." But the signs were there, lurking just beneath the surface, hidden in the spaces between the moments of joy and serenity. Ezra's fishing trips to Lake Tangipahoa became more frequent over the years. At first, Clarissa thought nothing of it. After all, he had always enjoyed the solitude of the lake, the peace it seemed to offer him. But as time went on, the trips became less about recreation and more about an escape. He would leave for days at a time, often with little explanation, and when he returned, he was more distant, quieter than before. Clarissa didn't question him. It was, after all, just a hobby. She told herself that he needed the time to clear his head, and in the busy swirl of family life, she convinced herself it was a harmless ritual, a small retreat from the responsibilities of home. Then there were the holidays, those moments when families come together, and you're expected to be surrounded by loved ones. But Ezra started avoiding them. He would make excuses: work, sickness, even vague references to needing some time to himself. His absence was always felt by Clarissa, but she brushed it off. After all, they had their own little family, didn't they? The extended family could manage without him. He had his reasons, surely, but it was the subtle flinches that bothered her most. It happened when unexpected guests arrived or when the doorbell rang late at night. Ezra's body would stiffen, his smile would falter, and for a brief second, his eyes would betray him, darkened, fearful, as though he was bracing for something. Clarissa, ever the optimist, chalked it up to stress, perhaps the weight of his work or the pressures of family life. She convinced herself that there was no cause for concern. But in her gut, something didn't sit right. She just didn't want to acknowledge it. It was easier to ignore the whispers, to keep up the illusion of perfection than to face the unsettling truth that something was wrong. For her, trust was the foundation of their marriage. Ezra was her partner, her rock. She had no reason to doubt him, and so she didn't. When friends or family raised an eyebrow, offering concerned looks or subtle comments, she defended him fiercely. Ezra was loyal, kind, dependable, nothing like the men who betrayed their wives, nothing like the men who hid their dark sides. He was her husband, and she believed in him, believed in the life they had built together. She couldn't see the burden Ezra carried. She didn't know that beneath his calm demeanor and soft-spoken words, he was living a double life, hiding his true identity behind a mask he had perfected over the years. A mask that allowed him to outrun his past, to outrun the demons that would eventually come knocking at their door. He had carefully constructed this life with Clarissa, woven it into the fabric of their family, and she, unknowingly, had become part of the illusion, a key player in his carefully curated escape from the consequences of his actions. Ezra was running from something far darker than Clarissa could ever imagine, and as each year passed, the weight of his secret grew heavier. But for Clarissa, life went on. She was blind to the storm that was gathering, blind to the devastation that would soon tear apart the world she had built. The foundation of their marriage, once so firm and secure, was already crumbling, but it was still hidden beneath layers of trust and affection, unseen but felt by only one person, Ezra himself. It was just after dawn on June 14, 2023, when the world that Clarissa Deveraux knew was ripped apart. The silence of the sleepy Jackson morning was shattered by the deafening sound of pounding fists on the front door. Clarissa, half asleep, stumbled out of bed, her mind still clouded with the remnants of a dream she couldn't remember. She opened the door, expecting to see a neighbor or perhaps a delivery, but instead, she was met by a swarm of FBI agents, their badges gleaming under the porch light. Before she could process what was happening, they were inside. The sharp scent of panic filled the air as they barged into her home, their boots heavy on the hardwood floors. She was barely given a moment to react when one of them, a tall, steely-eyed agent, handed her a search warrant, its contents a blur of words she couldn't make sense of. Murder, child trafficking, fugitive status. The words rang through her head like a cacophony, but they made no sense. Her heart pounded as she glanced at Ezra, who stood frozen, his face an unreadable mask of calm. Then, the nightmare began. FBI agents swarmed through every corner of their house. They rifled through cabinets, tore open drawers, and ripped apart closets. Clarissa tried to speak, tried to demand answers, but her voice caught in her throat. Ezra, the man she had known, trusted, and loved for more than 3 decades, was under arrest. She barely heard the words as they were read to him: charges of murder, child trafficking, and being a fugitive from justice. Her entire world began to spin. Ezra was a murderer? A child trafficker? A fugitive? No, it couldn't be. She had known him for so long, had built everything with him: the life they had, the family, the dreams. But as the words slammed into her, she felt her legs tremble beneath her, the foundation of her reality crumbling faster than she could grasp. Clarissa was led through the house, numb and disoriented, her eyes scanning the chaos. As the agents continued their search, they uncovered horrors that would haunt her forever. Hidden ledgers, their pages filled with cryptic entries she couldn't decipher, were found stashed in the back of a locked drawer. There were fake passports, dozens of them, each one stamped with names that were not her husband's. Newspaper clippings from missing persons cases that spanned years were taped into a binder, with notes scrawled in the margins that made her stomach turn. Then they found it. The truth she had never imagined, not in a million years. Ezra, the man who had stood beside her, held her hand, and shared their life together, was not who he had claimed to be. He wasn't Ezra Deveraux. He was Thelonious Vance Booker, a former black separatist turned monster. A man with a history of violence, a man who had crossed the line into unspeakable crimes. The realization hit Clarissa like a freight train, knocking the wind from her lungs. The face she had loved, the man she had trusted with her heart, was a stranger, a man whose life had been a series of lies. The weight of the discovery crashed down on her, and she stumbled back, her vision blurring. Her hand shook uncontrollably as the world around her morphed into a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Clarissa's heart was torn in two as the pieces of her life shattered in front of her eyes. The perfect life she had so carefully built, the love she had believed to be unbreakable, was now exposed as a facade. The man she had known as her husband, the father of her children, was a criminal, a predator who had lived a double life. Everything she had known about her life, her family, and the person she had married was gone. In an instant, the past 30 years of her life were erased. All the love, the laughter, the shared memories now felt like a cruel joke. She was left standing in the ruins of a life built on lies, staring at the man who had once been her everything but now was nothing more than a monster in disguise. As the truth unraveled, it became clear that the man Clarissa had shared her life with was not just a stranger, he was a monster cloaked in a well-crafted mask. Thelonious Vance Booker, a name she had never heard, had lived a life of darkness, a life that defied every ounce of what Clarissa had believed to be true about him. His crimes, once hidden in plain sight, were so vile that they could never have been imagined. A former member of a black militant group in the 1970s, Ezra had woven a web of terror, a web that spanned decades, masking himself behind a facade of respectability, family, and faith. The nightmare began in the 1970s when Booker, under the guise of a black liberation ideology, had established so-called safe houses for marginalized people. These were nothing more than fronts, carefully constructed lies that hid the most heinous of operations. Behind those walls, beneath the surface of what appeared to be sanctuaries, was a network for trafficking underage girls. The victims were drawn in with promises of safety and security, only to find themselves trapped in a twisted world of sexual abuse, violence, and despair. Testimonies from survivors painted a picture of unimaginable brutality. Women and children who had once sought refuge found themselves in a living nightmare. They spoke of Booker, of Ezra using his charm and his influence to lure them into his twisted scheme. They described a man who was both terrifying and magnetic, a man who could turn his cruelty on a dime, a man who lived without remorse for the suffering he caused. These were not isolated incidents, but a pattern of systematic rape, torture, and even murder. Among those survivors was Kalila Baptiste, whose testimony would become a pivotal moment in this grotesque unraveling. Kalila, a victim of Ezra's horrific abuse, spoke of being held captive in a church basement, one of Booker's many twisted locations. It was in that cold, damp cellar that she and others were assaulted, violated, and broken by a man who had promised them safety, but only delivered pain. The turning point came when Kalila revealed a chilling detail. A shawl that had once belonged to her, found in the basement of that church. The FBI traced it to the Deveraux home, and with the discovery of DNA evidence, they could no longer deny the truth of her testimony. Ezra, the man Clarissa had loved, had been the one to commit the unimaginable acts of cruelty. He had personally assaulted Kalila and others, marking their bodies and lives forever. The shawl, stained with the remnants of her suffering, was proof enough. But that was just the beginning. As the investigation delved deeper, the FBI uncovered something far worse: a hidden crawlspace beneath the basement of the Deveraux home. It was a place where unspeakable acts had been committed, a place so deeply buried in the dark recesses of the house that it had remained hidden from Clarissa's eyes for years. In that crawlspace, the FBI found unimaginable evidence of the crimes Ezra had perpetrated. Among the items recovered were images of child pornography, chilling reminders of the young girls who had been exploited and brutalized. But there was one item that stood out among the rest: a blood-stained Bible, its pages worn and fragile, and inside it, the name of a missing 12-year-old girl from 1976. Her disappearance had been reported decades ago, but her case had gone cold, a name lost to time. But Ezra, or rather Thelonious Vance Booker, knew the truth. He knew what had happened to her. The discovery of the Bible, with its bloody pages and the girl's name etched into the history of his crimes, was enough to send shockwaves through the investigation. It was a grotesque testament to the lives Ezra had destroyed, and the lives he had hidden beneath the surface of a respectable family man. For Clarissa, the realization was unbearable. She had been living with a man who was not just a criminal but a predator, one whose reach had extended far beyond their home and into the lives of countless innocent children. The Deveraux family's perfect life was a lie, a thin veneer of normalcy that concealed horrors beyond imagination. The shockwaves of Ezra's arrest and the discovery of his crimes reverberated through the community. Clarissa was left to grapple with the brutal reality that her husband, the man she had loved, the man who had fathered her children, was a monster. The man who had shared her bed, the man she had trusted with her life, was the same man who had shattered the lives of countless girls, and who had somehow convinced her that all was well. In the wake of these revelations, Clarissa stood at the edge of an abyss, her world forever altered by the man who had once promised to be her everything. The aftermath of Ezra's arrest shattered more than just the Deveraux family. It destroyed everything Clarissa had spent her life building. The community that once embraced her as a pillar of strength, grace, and faith now turned its back on her. The small town of Jackson, Mississippi, which had long known her as a teacher and mother, soon saw her as nothing more than an accomplice to the man who had caused so much devastation. Friends who once called her their closest confidant began to distance themselves, offering hollow words of sympathy that only deepened her isolation. Her church, the very place where she had found solace and strength, closed its doors to her as the rumors about her husband's crimes spread like wildfire. Clarissa had become a pariah, rejected by everyone she had trusted, abandoned by a society that once held her in such high regard. The pressure from the media was relentless. Every reporter, every camera, was focused on Clarissa, her every move scrutinized as if she were guilty by association. Protesters gathered outside her home, chanting for justice, holding signs that demanded answers to questions she could not even begin to process. The haunting images of Ezra's crimes were splashed across newspapers and TV screens, and Clarissa was forced to watch as the man she had loved was painted as a monster. But it wasn't just the community that turned its back on Clarissa, it was her own family. Her parents, who had once been so proud of her, now spoke to her with cold indifference, unable to reconcile the woman they had raised with the wife of a child trafficker. They questioned her judgment, blaming her for not seeing the truth about Ezra, despite how carefully he had woven his lies over the years. The idea that she had been complicit in his crimes was too much for her family to bear, and in the end, they disowned her, cutting ties as though she had never been their daughter. Clarissa was left to confront the horrifying realization that the people who should have supported her the most were the ones who had Abin. Extended far beyond Clarissa. Her children, each of them struggling to make sense of the man they had called father, found themselves fractured by the betrayal. Malik, the eldest, became defiant and combative, unable to accept that the father he had idolized was a monster. He lashed out at anyone who dared to question Ezra's character, even threatening journalists who dared to invade their privacy. Malik was desperate to preserve the image of his father, unwilling to face the truth that Ezra had destroyed everything in his wake. His anger was a shield, a way to protect himself from the overwhelming sense of loss and betrayal that threatened to consume him. Ayana, the middle child, spiraled into a deep depression. A successful lawyer in her own right, she withdrew from her law practice, unable to focus on anything other than the collapse of her family. She struggled to reconcile the woman she had become with the broken reality of her father's crimes. Ayana found herself unable to trust anyone, including herself. The world she had once known was gone, and in its place was a hollow emptiness that she couldn't seem to fill. Darnell, the youngest of the three, chose to distance himself entirely. He packed up his family and moved to Atlanta, severing all ties to the Deveraux name. The weight of his father's crimes was too much for him to bear, and he couldn't bring himself to stay in a place that had once been his home, but was now a constant reminder of the betrayal and horror. Darnell's decision to leave was a final rejection of the past, a desire to start anew, far away from the man who had shattered everything he thought he knew about family and love. But even in Atlanta, Darnell carried the scars of his upbringing, scars that would never fully heal. For Clarissa, the isolation was profound. She had lost everything. Her home, once filled with warmth and laughter, was now a hollow shell of what it had once been. Her church, the community that had sustained her through so many trials, was now a place that shunned her. The trial of Thelonious Booker, once Ezra Deveraux, was nothing short of a media spectacle. February 2024 saw the beginning of the trial, and the eyes of the nation were fixed on the proceedings. Journalists from every corner of the world filled the courtroom, and the air was thick with anticipation. It was a moment that would define not only the lives of the victims but also the shattered remnants of Clarissa's existence. For Clarissa, the trial was a brutal reckoning. Each testimony, each graphic piece of evidence presented in court felt like a searing brand on her soul. The courtrooms gasped at the evidence of child pornography, some of it dating back to the 1970s, meticulously kept in a hidden compartment of their home. It was all too much for her to bear. The prosecution dropped bombshell after bombshell, tying Ezra to a sordid past that spanned decades. The chilling evidence was irrefutable, and yet it was Ezra's final words that would echo in Clarissa's ears for the rest of her life. After being sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 500 years for his heinous crimes, Ezra turned to face Clarissa one last time. His gaze was cold, devoid of any remorse, as he spoke in a voice that would haunt her forever. "You love the mask, Clarissa. You never wanted to see the man." In that moment, the weight of his words hit Clarissa like a physical blow. The days that followed the trial were a blur of finality for Clarissa. Her life, as she had once known it, was over. She was forced to sell the family home at a loss, the place where she had once raised her children, held family dinners, and imagined a future that would never come. The house, once a symbol of their perfect life, had become a tomb for all the broken dreams. With no other option, Clarissa moved into a crumbling apartment on the outskirts of Jackson. It was a far cry from the beautiful home she had once cherished, but now it was all she had left. Her days were filled with isolation. The phone calls from friends never came. The visits from family members ceased. She had become a pariah in her own town, branded forever as the wife of a monster. Willful ignorance can sometimes be just as dangerous as deception itself. How often do we allow ourselves to believe what we want to believe, even when the truth stares us in the face? The story of Clarissa and Ezra is a chilling reminder of the danger that lies within the masks we wear and the consequences of blind trust. It challenges us to look closer, to question the things we take for granted, and understand that sometimes the monsters we fear most are the ones we let closest. If this chilling true story shocked you, like and subscribe for more devastating tales of love, betrayal, and hidden monsters.